And now for something completely different.
Happy Halloween, fellow psychonauts. I hope you've been enjoying the onslaught of dark and twisted trip reports that I've been featuring lately. My apologies if I've ended up cursing you of any nightmares from exposing you to these fiendishly wicked stories. Some of them have been really out there. But, like they say, darkness cannot be extinguished until it's first brought to the surface. To cap off the spooky season, I thought I'd take a brief look at this mesmerising, thought-provoking piece of cinema that I saw for the very first time recently. It's called Altered States, although you've probably figured that one out already. I bet just from witnessing the montage at the beginning of the video, imagine you've already been lured in by the trippy and hypnotising visuals on screen, which is probably the main reason why I vouch for this being the ideal psychedelic horror movie to watch this Halloween. Just make sure you aren't too far gone while witnessing the cacophony of biblical horror unfold. You might find yourself sucked into the point of no return. I'd say the best way to watch this one is in a clear mindset, in order to properly soak in its intriguing story and fully appreciate its arresting filmmaking. Although, you do you. Can't stop you from enhancing your immersion in however you see fit. So, what's the crack with this film then? What's it all about? Well, to summarise, it follows the research of a scientist keen on exploring the boundaries and frontiers of consciousness by altering his mind through various means. He initially starts off with sensory deprivation tanks, later plunging deep down the rabbit hole of hallucinogenic mixtures from Native American shamans. Psychonautic enthusiasts will be pleased to hear numerous references to the field of mind expansion, psychedelia, and consciousness alteration. The most notable segment in the film being the main character Jessup's experience with the Hinti tribe and their psychedelic brew, which contains everyone's favourite red and white mushroom, the Amanita muscaria, which interestingly is mixed with the Hymea salicifolia, a lesser known species of flowering plant that was used for shamanic purposes by native peoples of Central America and Mexico throughout history. In the method of preparation commonly used, fresh leaves are collected and allowed to wilt. The leaves are then put into a cup or jar, cool water being added, and the mixture is placed in the sun to brew and ferment for at least 24 hours. It is said that during the fermentation process, the knowledge of the sun is embedded into the potion, creating the elixir of the sun. This part of the story where Jessup consumes the brew produces what is easily the most striking piece of psychedelic cinema I've ever seen, and really cemented my love for the whole movie. It's honestly a delight to behold, and I would hate to spoil it right here for you. So as Jessup's exploration of altered states of consciousness deepens throughout the course of the film, he soon starts to shed his materialistic notions of memory, time, and reality itself, beginning to question whether consciousness itself is absolute, and that man's way of perceiving reality is just one of a seemingly infinite variety of states that consciousness can experience. This culminates in Jessup transcending the physical plane, merging with a far more primitive state of being, after his quest to understand consciousness starts to blur the line between our world and the astral realms, leaving his normal human life in a state of disarray. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the sheer highlight of the whole movie are these strikingly surreal trip sequences that occur sporadically throughout its runtime. These are easily some of the most awe-inspiring visuals I've ever seen in a film, let alone one that features psychedelics as part of the plot. It actually reminded me of one of my other favourite films, A Holy Mountain, which is another must-see for anyone who likes these disturbing psychedelic sequences. So there's a few of these scattered throughout the film, and each one is distinctly weird. You'll be glued to the screen like I was when these segments roll around. And as someone who is fascinated by altered states of consciousness and bizarre Lynchian filming and editing techniques, the way the Amanita trip and the surreal float pod experiences were visually conveyed really had me falling in love with the whole experience, and a vast number of these shots are now etched into my retinas, all worthy of being framed. Also, as a big fan of Godflesh and their Street Cleaner album, one of the most essential pieces of post-metal and industrial music, it was cool to witness the still that they chose for the album art, which takes place during the more hellish section of the movie's foray into psychedelic delirium. Anyone who takes a wicked pleasure in exploring the world of deliriums that are conveyed through trip reports will be enamoured by the accuracy to the disturbingly bizarre visions that one can experience whilst under the effects of these substances. Although, it must be said, I would never actually advocate the use of such things. Curiosity is all well and good until your life is ruined by a primordial caveman from the ninth circle of hell. So thankfully the film is also carried by some great acting, as well as an engrossing story and a clearly well researched and written script that tells you the director Ken Russell may have had his own fair share of mystical visions throughout his life. My favourite part of the film, other than the trip sequences, is the clever parallels that it makes with the clash between materialistic and idealistic scientific approaches to studying altered states of consciousness and psychedelics themselves. The fearful, dismissive type scientist in the film, who mocks Jessup's foray into the unknown, perfectly captures the resistance from close-minded scientists who are unwilling to acknowledge the validity of these radical states of mind. This character is pretty much the movie's version of people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, scientists who are clearly too fearful to open their mind up to the possibility that everything they understand about reality and the universe is just an infinitesimally small fraction of the bigger picture. This is portrayed throughout the runtime in excellently acted conflicts of interest and perspective, complemented by a script with enough scientific and philosophical jargon to have Plato rolling around in his grave, wherever the fuck that is nowadays. There are some problems with altered states though. Anyone who's seen it already knows the caveman on the loose sequence, while not bad, is a far cry from the inventiveness of the trippier and more thoughtful moments in the story. However, that being said, while the trippy moments become less prominent as the film goes on, there's still some excellently done practical and CGI effects that really add to the strange feeling that the film evokes in you, and thankfully the story and characters are well written and acted enough that they keep you engrossed all the way to the end of the movie. The most memorable shots, that being of the psychedelic trips, are accentuated by amazing artistic techniques and cinematography, as well as being thoughtfully paced and implemented at points during the story. These frightfully gripping segments latch deep into the recesses of your mind and remain clear in your head once the story subsides. But really though, the less said about this film the better. If you're after a horror movie which eloquently depicts the depths of twisted psychedelia and delirious biblical terror, you won't find a better suit for Halloween than Altered States. Oh yeah, and possibly the weirdest thing about the whole film is that the ending of Aha's Take On Me video is directly inspired by a segment of the film which takes place in its last act, which might be the most obscure reference in a music video that I've ever heard of. Pretty crazy how the overwhelming majority of people who've seen that video will have no idea that this viciously visceral psychedelic horror movie inspired one of the most famous pop music videos ever made. So let me know if any of you guys decide to give this a watch over the next few days, and leave me a comment if you've already seen it before. Thank you guys so much for watching, and if you'd like me to cover more psychedelic tinged movies in the future, please don't hesitate to say. Peace out.
And have a happy Halloween.